Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a slightly later Frontline update from yesterday. Today is the 20th of November 2022. Before I get started on Frontline, I just want to point people towards yesterday's extra video that is on my new channel that I'm trying to migrate content from here so that eventually all my new Ukraine war stuff will be posted straight to ATP, Atypical Philosopher, ATP Geopolitics. So that is at ATP Geo. So if you put youtube.com/at ATP Geo, please find that, please subscribe there, and you'll get my extra videos. So I will be posting them on alternate days to that channel, and eventually, bit by bit, I'll increase the content that I put on there until all of it goes on there, and I can separate my philosophy from my geopolitical stuff. So that's a nice video actually. I quite like that extra. I think it's got quite a few nuggets for you to get your teeth into. So please go and check yesterday's one out. It is still perfectly relevant for today. Okay, let's go to front lines. Well, before we go there, let's talk about what's happened overnight. Not a lot happened overnight, so really very quiet overnight as far as Russia attacking Ukraine is concerned. Here we have the Ukrainian figures for the losses. Again, we see the expected downtick after Kherson was counted and after that front sort of calmed down. We have seen the lowest for some time, 350 liquidated personnel, one tank, two APCs, one artillery system. So really not a lot, and one drone. That again reflects that there isn't much drone activity, not a lot of cruise missile activity and drone activity going into Ukraine overnight or in the mornings. So that's really good news for Ukraine. Their electricity infrastructure has already been, or energy infrastructure has already been hugely affected, and they obviously need as much time as they can to sort things out there. Okay, a bit of news. So, an armed Ukrainian soldier crossed the Belarusian border, the State Border Committees, SBC, of the Republic of Belarus said. The alleged incident occurred yesterday, November the 19th, around 4 p.m. So, there's this video that is the Belarusians are using to show that, um, you know, the Ukrainians are doing bad things, and is highly controversial as far as the Belarusians are concerned. Escalator in some sense. As Noel continues here, a camera at the railway checkpoint Slavechno, Ukrainian side Vystupovichi, recorded the movement of the armed man on the territory in the direction of the border. Territory of Ukraine in the direction of the border. Subsequently, he crossed the border and entered the territory of Belarus, the message says. However, that video footage, that bridge, as according to Noel reports here, says what I don't understand is that this bridge is on Ukrainian territory. And so they're all getting their knickers in a twist about this, but it appears that that bridge is still in Ukraine. And then they say, and then he went into Belarusian territory. Well, I don't see any proof of that. So this could be the Belarusians trying to stoke things up to warrant or to justify some kind of retaliation from then. So I'm talking about Belarus. So Russia is trying to overload the depleted Ukrainian air defense reserves. This is quite an interesting idea. So therefore, Russia has increased the number of its own missile strikes. This is reported in Sky News with reference to the statement of the Pentagon's Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl. This is the idea that they've been sending over these huge waves of missiles. In fact, the largest wave since the beginning of the war, and this is to completely overwhelm the air defense. If they'd sent maybe, I don't know, 50 missiles, then all of those missiles could have been successfully taken down. But if you send it out just a wave that's too much for the defenses, 90, 100 missiles, then you've got a greater chance of some getting through, and it just completely overwhelms the defenses. And then you can continue doing that. Well, they haven't continued doing that, so I think this shows that they're trying to overwhelm the defenses, but they really don't have enough missiles left. Which then it appears, I don't know if I've got that on my no, I haven't. I think it's on my extra. So then it looks like Belarus are providing loads of S-300s and 400s to Russia as well. So it could be that in a recognition that they're running low on missiles, they are getting as much as they can from Belarus. But they seem to be unable to keep those waves going on consecutive nights. Like if I was, this is me just trying to be tactical. or strategic. But if I was the Russians and I'd done all those cruise missile attacks and almost completely debilitated the Ukrainian infrastructure, then the next night I'll be doing the same thing. You know, that has worked to some degree. I mean, it's terrible and it's horrible and it's arguably a war crime. But if they've done it 10 times, you know, I don't mean whatever, it's terrible. But the idea is that they haven't done that on consecutive nights. So don't keep going. Have to wait some time to get those missiles up again from whatever stocks they have. It just seems to me like they don't have those missiles ready to go, and they're thinking twice about using them and completely depleting their stocks. Anyway, there you go. So yesterday on my extra video, I showed this burning gas pipe in near St. Petersburg. And there was some really impressive footage of this. I mean, it looks like a pretty catastrophic explosion and continued fire until that was put out. Well, today that looks a little bit like this, which is that was obviously kicking out gas, and that gas was on fire and exploding. That's the end result today. Almost certainly some kind of sabotage, or at least or maybe a direct hit from Ukrainians somehow. I don't know. Well, no, it's in St. Petersburg, so it's never going to be. So one would assume it's some kind of sabotage. Anyway, moving on to the last strategic thing before we start the front lines. There's been there's been a lot of focus on the railway logistics in terms of the occupied regions of Ukraine. So we know, as I've talked about before in very early videos of mine, that the Russian army is a railway army. So its logistics are set up for the railway. They're not very good at truck supplies via truck, and in fact they just simply don't have the truck capacity. They have hardly any trucks. They started the war with hardly any trucks. It was something like 4,000 trucks compared to the Americans would use for the same sort of thing 100,000 trucks. Or they have that. That's the difference, because actually Russia relies almost entirely on the railway networks. Well, the trucks have been degraded over the course of the conflict, and you can see that Ukraine are really trying to concentrate a lot on hitting the railway. So we had north of Starobilsk as well as Starobilsk. I don't know if the Starobilsk attacks were on the railway itself, but they have been hit with HIMARS. But this was definitely on a railway up north in Belokoraknie. And then we had Ilovaisk just recently as well down here, and other hits as well. And it turns out that down around here near Pavlivka and Vuhledar, that very important, those battles going on at the moment, around in that corner of the front line, there is, you could argue, some kind of fire control over the railway with a range of decent artillery. And that, let's go back to this map. So as you can see, this railway line that kind of goes through Donetsk is realistically is the only access to the whole of the west here. It would have been Kherson, but now to the rest of the Kherson Oblast on the left bank of the river, Melitopol, Berdyansk, Mariupol, and Sevastopol and Crimea. That is being supplied predominantly through this railway line. So you can understand why they hit Ilovaisk there. And I'd imagine they'll be trying to hit with artillery the railway logistics just south of Vuhledar, as you can see from here. You take that out, and Russia are in trouble. So I'm sure you'll see just a lot of railway hits going on over the next week or so. It'd be amazing if they didn't continue to do that. Okay, front lines. I could do the front lines in about 2 minutes. You know me, I talk too much. Front lines, the whole Kupiansk to Svatove and down to Kreminna front line, no change at all. Just to say, there have been repelled attacks from both sides. Kuzmivka is probably the heaviest area of attack at the moment, or heaviest area of fighting at the moment, which is northwest of Svatove. And in fact, just to the west of Kuzmivka, fighting as well in Novoselivsky. So although I've got that controlled by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were pushing on to Kuzmivka over this last week, I think almost certainly this whole area is a grey zone, and there's a lot of fighting for Novoselivsky, and then on to Kazimivska, which is a kind of almost a gateway into these towns north of Svatova. So this seems to be the key area of fighting there at the moment, but no real change. It's just really heavy. There's shelling going on all along this front line, particularly from the Russians. Ukrainians are fighting hard in Ploshchanka and Chervonopivka. Again, nothing different from what I've said over the last few days, but they are still trying to do their attacks down there. ISW says pretty much exactly that. So what's the Institute for Study of War says, the US think tank, Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks in the directions of Chervonopivka and Ploshchanka. A Russian military blogger noted that Ukrainian forces returned to positional battles following the unsuccessful attempts to assault Russian positions in Chervonopivka. And there you go. So it's returning to, rather than breaking through the lines and making these quick attacks through the defensive lines, it's positional battles and artillery and all sorts of stuff going on there, or maybe not all sorts of stuff, quite restrained kind of positional battles. As we come further down south, I think Dubrova is possibly under Ukrainian control now, and I've noted that as of yesterday, all of the forested areas, some claim, are under Ukrainian control. I've left the Russian line there just because I haven't heard anything on that since then. And again, fighting around Bilorivka as we come down south. As this long-towned name, there's a lot of fighting around here. This is where I did some geolocation the other day to show you a Russian I think infantry fighting vehicle getting blown up by an ATGM fired from sort of looked like this direction around here. So there is heavy fighting going on there at the moment, and Spirny. So lots of activity around Spirny. In fact, what does ISW say? A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces continued to attack Ukrainian positions near Spirny. So before I had it Ukrainians attacking here, but then this is a push and pull of these kinds of confrontations. Spirny, Verkhnokamiansky, that's this place, and then Bilorivka just up north from there. So yeah, no change there, but this is the scene of quite a lot of activity at the moment. So and Zolotorivka as well, Bilorivka there. As we come further down south, we've got the other Bilorivka, and there's activity around there, and further on down to Bakhmut. So Bakhmut is, I said that the Russians have made some gains in this sort of southeast of Bakhmut, the waste sorting plant. If you didn't see my yesterday's report, it looks like they're starting to get a foothold in Bakhmut, but whether they can hold that, who knows? I mean, Bakhmut is incredibly well defended. So, even though the Russians do have this, actually going through Bakhmut and taking Bakhmut street to street, it will just be a meat grinder more than what you'd imagine already. Just north. Sorry, I forgot to say, just north by Severodonetsk, there's been HIMARS hits, or almost certainly HIMARS hits. Ammunition warehouse around Severodonetsk. So that is Severodonetsk, just north of where we are there. So we're down in Bakhmut now. I forgot to say around Severodonetsk. So they are, hitting, important targets around there. Okay, so back to where I was. So this is down to Bakhmut. Now, a few things to say about Bakhmut. This was quite interesting. It's probably very minor compared to Wagner, but a US Marine Colonel, Andrew Milburn, has founded his own PMC, so that's a private military sort of corps or whatever, called Mozart. Obviously, Mozart, Wagner. Interesting Wagner as well, because the music of Wagner, I think, was he not involved with or sympathized with the Nazis in the Second World War, and his music was associated with the Nazis. Interesting that now the Russians seem like neo-fascists. Anyway, has arrived in Bakhmut to fight the Russians. It's Mozart versus Wagner now. Now, you could argue that this won't be anywhere near the size of Wagner and the capabilities of Wagner at the moment, but hey, every little helps, doesn't it? And it'll be interesting to see what happens of that, where that goes, whether it's got any kind of future as a large-scale mercenary unit, and how they will operate compared to how the Ukrainian armed forces will operate. So Bakhmut is pretty hairy at the moment. Here's an example of the sort of one would assume that is Russians shelling or hitting with grads or doing something to Bakhmut rather than Ukrainians doing it the other way around, because if that is Bakhmut, that's where the Ukrainians are. When I say heavy shelling, this is what I mean. He now, yeah. So war. A map has said Opitny, south of Bakhmut, has moved back to contested. Russia is attacking the settlement from the southeast and Ivangrad, which is almost fully under their control. Okay, let's go back to my map. So this is the area that we've been talking about. I've been talking about for weeks. So Ivangrad, I've got broadly under Russian control. Well, now it seems that possibly I will move the Ukrainian lines back from Opitny, have that as neither controlling, and move the Russian lines a little bit forward in Ivangrad. And you could say that this is all part of the same move here, and is slightly worrying for the Ukrainians, even though, as I say, they're incredibly well defended and they are receiving reinforcements in this area. It is, it's not the best news for them, and they are fighting hard. But there are an awful lot of claims to say that it's just a complete meat grinder around there. Actually, no, I think I've got it somewhere else. So I'll go back to my map. Yeah, there are lots of claims to say the Russians are losing huge amounts of casualties here. As well, the Ukrainians will be too, but it is a real meat grind for the Russians. So even though they are taking some small amounts um, of territory, it comes at a huge cost to them. But for them, the cost of former prisoners and mobilized untrained soldiers, you might ask, is that cost fully acceptable to the Russians? Sadly speaking. Now, what does the ISW have to say about this? Well, there have been some moves. I'm going to move my Russian line forward a little bit in Klishchivka as well. So they say a Russian mill blogger claimed that the Russian forces continue to attack Ukrainian positions near Spirine. Oh, yeah, sorry, that was the last one. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? No, actually, it says very little about Bakhmut, other than they have continued their offensive operations around there, despite reports of high losses. So they talk about high losses on the front line as well. But there are, I'm sure I saw something about Klishchivka. But I think that there is movement from a few other sources I was reading earlier. There is movement towards Klishchivka. How much that is, these are mainly just sort of fields around here. There's a sort of small pond lake thing. But this is important, Klishchivka, because like with any of these towns, it's about having a buffer zone and being able to repel encirclements. So with Bakhmut, we're talking about Bakhmutsky and Solidar are the places that are holding out for an encirclement, and that gives them sort of fire control over this fielded area as well as having artillery from behind. But it's keeping this as a buffer zone to stop them getting encircled, and as well down in Klishchivka, which is in the middle of all this open field around here. So actually, this is quite important to keep hold of that. They've been trying as well further down south, the Russians, to get a larger encirclement. So anyway, lots of activity going on around there. Now, when it comes to Mayorsk, which is this area here, apparently, and I'm going to move my lines as well, so my lines will look a little bit different tomorrow because I'm going to adapt. I'm going to talk you through it first and then move them. So here it appears that the Russians have control over the railway station now, which, as you can see here, is this large, would be an important railway junction, but of course over to the west it's Ukrainian, over to the east it's Russian. So there's not a lot you can do with that rail line. But it seems like the Ukrainians are holding on to the settlement just to the northwest of there. So and I don't think the Russians have been able to go any further that way. Whether they go further south here towards, along the railway line, I don't know. There's a few things about Mayorsk, I think. So this is Defmon. Russian claimed control over this area a few days ago. GSUA reported a shelling there today. Based on geolocated video and the shelling, I find it likely Russia do not have control over the small settlement, only the rail station area. So basically, I am parroting Defmon here, as well as others that seem to indicate that that's remained in Ukrainian control, and they could push back there, or they might not. Obviously, that remains to be seen. Okay, going but further down south towards Avdivka, and again, this is another meat grinder of a battle going on. It has been for an awful long time. Incredibly well dug in defences around here. I think there are movements towards fighting in the eastern areas here. Certainly shelling going on around here. I mean, Avdivka, like many of these settlements, is not. It's not going to be a pleasant place to be living. That's for sure. Lots of evidence that it's pretty pretty horrible there. You wouldn't want to want to still be living there, but again, people are holding on in certain areas of Bakhmut, which is in an even worse position than Avdivka. But there you go. Now, a lot of talk about Opitny in the south of. To the south of Avdivka, it appears that really, I'll move the lines a bit. That the Russians really do control that whole town there now. I'll push my my blue Ukrainian lines back, and as I said yesterday, it's all about Vodyanye now. There's this area between Avdivka and Opitny, which becomes a sort of killing fields. If the Russians would attempt to do a full frontal assault, there'll be sort of no doubt all sorts of earthen defences dug in there. And there is just again apparently just huge losses around here. So this is what Peter Clifford Online says. Today's news from Ukraine war: 1, Russia takes huge losses around Bakhmut and Avdivka in the east. Russians outnumbered 4-10, being slaughtered by Ukrainian artillery strikes. Again, pinch of salt. Drone spots them and mortar fire follows. So then he just shows how, I mean, these guys just get completely obliterated, this Russian recon unit. And there's also there's quite a few bits of video that I'm not going to show you at all today. I'm not going to show you that because those guys just get obliterated. But I've also seen drones dropping IEDs, essentially improvised, explosive devices. We've seen an awful lot of the Ukrainians doing this. Ukrainians have been doing that for some time now, but I've seen quite a few Russian bits of Russian footage of them doing that to Ukrainians as well. So don't think it's all one way, and it's because I've shown you mainly pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian stuff, hammering the Russians. It is happening the other way, and the war takes its toll on both sides, obviously. But yeah, huge losses for the Russians, certainly in Avdivka and Bakhmut. Um, yeah. In Nevelsky, it's a lot of. I talked extensively about this area yesterday. There is talk that the Russians are on the outskirts of Nevelsky. Now, I don't know whether that means this qualifies as the outskirts with some of these fortifications taken. This is the swimming pool fortification, or whether they have indeed got into the outskirts of this small sort of village, really, with its agricultural setup here, where the Ukrainians are very well defended there. They're dug in and fortified there. There are, as I mentioned every day, I know I have to repeat myself because people don't watch all of my videos, right? But each one of these tree lines here is basically a trench, and so advancing for the Russians is super difficult. And there are trenches. I mean, you can see some of these trenches. Someone rightly told me that this was actually taken in 2019. And even in 2019, you can see evidence of, well, you can see evidence of the pockmarks of shells, but the evidence of trenches. So this is a swimming pool, and these are all trenches there, right? So that's 2019. Well, you can bet your bottom dollar now that there'll be like 20 times as many trenches now. and all this whole area will be, every tree line here will be a trench, and people dug in there, and underground stuff, so that if the shells hit the trenches, you can still be underground and get away with that. So it's really difficult terrain to take, um, and that's why it's taken so long. Anyway, too much of me talking. I move on. Marinka, same old, and then back down to Pavlivka and Vuhledar. Interestingly, Pavlivka seems to be pretty quiet, actually, and there is talk that maybe they're taking a foot off the gas, the Russians, here, because it is an absolute death trap. There's footage of a Russian recon unit being completely wiped out here. I obviously won't show you that. Quite a lot of talk about this settlement, Mykilsky, whether this might be where they're going to concentrate now, or whether the Ukrainians, around there. But essentially, no change of territory. And as we come very quickly down to Kherson, there's again not a lot of news from here. The Ukrainians have hit certain places. Like there's a place just around here. Where are you? Mikhailivka. So what's happened around there? Ukrainian forces continue targeting Russian force concentrations and military assets south of the Dnipro River. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces struck a Russian force concentration area in Mykolaiivka, 38 kilometers south of Kherson, on the R57 highway, killing 60 personnel, wounding 70 personnel. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported Ukrainian forces struck a Russian force concentration in the Kinburn Spit, killing 7 personnel and destroying 2 armoured vehicles. Okay, so that's there. And then we go over to the Kinburn Spit. Why this is interesting is because, I mean, if they are accurate with what they're saying, the Spit is only this bit along here, right? So all this talk about the Kinburn Peninsula being taken, or forces landing here, and all this kind of stuff. If the the Ukrainian commander reported that Ukrainian forces struck a Russian force concentration on the Kinburn Spit, that means they haven't even cleared out the Spit yet. Now, whether that is just ISW not getting Spit accurate here, and thinking the whole thing is the Spit, and then it could be anywhere on the peninsula, then actually that to me straight away seems pretty plausible. Or all the stuff we were hearing before was just wishful thinking in terms of how much the Ukrainians uh, had got into this whole area, into the peninsula. It could just be that they are still struggling to take control over any part of the whole peninsula, including the Spit. So it'll be interesting to see the details about that. But there you go. That's really not a lot of change at all. Fairly quiet, although never quiet, because it is just a meat grinder along so much of this this front line, particularly the Donetsk up into Luhansk, a real meat grinder there, and certain elements of the Svatove-Kreminna line. Anyway, please like, subscribe, share. Thanks for all of your support. Thanks to all the people on Buy Me a Coffee, people who help with PayPal and through YouTube. Thanks and all of that. Really appreciate that. And please come and hang out at ATPGO, where it'd be great if I can get my subscribers up to sort of 2,000 subscribers, and then 4,000 watch hours, and then it'll be able to get this channel up to being able to do what this particular channel does, and then I can split my stuff into 2. But it would be great to see you over there. I really appreciate all your support. Toodle pips, and I'll see you for the extra video later.